Welcome back to Corbin AI, where I'm showing you daily how to start leveraging artificial intelligence in your personal and your business life. Today's video is a little bit more niche. We're going to be going over the topic of artificial intelligence integrated SaaSes, and more specifically when it comes to OpenAI's API and rate limiting. Now, this is an important topic for you to understand, as when you're building out your AI SaaS, this is going to come into play. We're going to give you some of our past experiences when consulting the documentation for rate limiting and some stuff to keep in mind as you go into a production level and actually launch your AI SaaS in this context. So let's go to jump in here and let's go ahead and first outline what even is rate limiting in the context of OpenAI's API. And what it is here is essentially how many requests per minute and how many tokens per minute you can use on their AI. And they do this for obvious reasons of exploitation, but also excess usage that may incur when in the development process, when you may cause an accidental loop. And I'm going to give you an example of that real quick. But as you see here, we'll see that there is tokens per minute and requests per minute. You are more likely to hit tokens per minute faster than you are requests per minute because of the fact that, as you'll see from our personal rate limiting and our personal tokens per minute in the past, comparative to what it is now, it's a little bit higher, but you'll see essentially why you'd be more likely to hit tokens per minute. How it works is that every single minute in the context of tokens per minute and every single rate or every single request per minute resets after 1 minute, like in the name, but your specific allocated amount of tokens or request is specific to each underlying account. So if we jumped over to our main account here, you can see that our tokens per minute and requests per minute is pretty high. I will say in the beginning of our development phase, the tokens per minute that we were allocated was 160,000 for GPT 3.5 and around 4,000. For GPT-4 it was around 40,000 tokens per minute. But within the last 1 to 2 weeks, I think because we've been getting increased usage of the underlying API as we're getting ready to launch, ours went up drastically all the way up to 1 million tokens per minute and 150,000 tokens per minute for GPT-4. Let me go and explain a little bit more what that means and essentially what you can grab from this. So coming over to our whiteboard here, when we were working with the 3.5 model and the 4 model in the building of our SaaS, we were allocated around 160,000 tokens per minute for 3.5 and 40,000 per minute for GPT-4. Now that might sound like a lot, but in reality, it really isn't, because of the fact that one of the things that we did early on is that we accidentally created a loop, and that loop caused us to request enough 3.5 tokens for us to basically max out within 10 seconds, honestly, probably 5 seconds. So we hit 160,000 within 5 seconds. So in the context of what we were doing, every single request equated to around 3,000 to 4,000 tokens used, I believe, if I remember correctly. So then I started doing the math and I started thinking, okay, well, this was caused by an error, but in theory, if we were to quantify that, it comes out to being around 50 people. So in theory, if 50 people were to use our service at the exact same time or within the exact same minute, that could cause an issue with the platform and the platform could break, because then what happens in the next minute, we forget these users that tried to just request our API, but it failed because, we hit our token usage. So after experiencing that, I realized two main things. The two main things I realized was, first off, okay, we need to set up some type of system to handle excess amount of requests to our API. So that's what in this context, that's called rate limiting. And then the second thing that became apparent to me was the fact that it would be nice to have more tokens per minute and rate per minute. So if you want to see this specific context for your OpenAI dashboard, all you got to do is come over to your just OpenAI dashboard and come up to rate limits, and you'll see what's afforded to you. I'll be honest, we didn't start with this much. Now we have access to a lot more, kind of making my original issue. In long term, this obviously, we built an entire system to handle excess amount of API usage, but in short term, for us personally to hit a 1 million tokens per minute, it would require the underlying it would require 400 users to click the same button at the same time. So let me go ahead and explain that a little bit more in depth here. So when we ran into the issue and we realized that, okay, so in theory, if 50 people were to use our service within a minute, we would run into a rate limit issue. The way we kind of circumnavigated that is that we built out a global queue. And the way the global queue works is it will take, when we realize that we're nearing a certain level of token usage, we're going to initiate global queue. And what the global queue does in this context is that it will store all the relevant data of those 50 users. And when we have reset after the minute, we're going to go ahead and push those users' data back out to the underlying each specific user ID and have it so that we have, their underlying service provided. Therefore, we're not losing the data. This global queue is on the top level surface. Therefore, it's in the cloud. And if an individual were to submit their video, they would be prompted with some type of screen telling them that they're in a global queue. And then since it's a global queue, we will know their position aligned, whether it's 3, 4, 20, and so on. And then based off what we know about our processing, we can kind of give them a gauge of, well, if you're 20th in line, that's probably going to take around, maybe 15 minutes. And then, it'll reset the queue and kind of go from there. Now, I want to go ahead and give you some real inside knowledge here on how you would set up something like this. And in the future, we plan on doing more in-depth tutorials on this topic. But here's two major pointers that you need to understand when dealing with rate limits and when it comes to OpenAI's API. First thing you need to understand is you can't use the way that you would traditionally call it in the coding. So what I mean by that is right now, if you were to integrate OpenAI's API into a React or just Visual Code Studio, and you would use the typical way of communicating with this API, which would be, OpenAI chat, and like you kind of just use their more, like it's basically their version of, if they made an update on their back end, it would automatically push towards your front end, so you don't have to do a lot of rework on the underlying prompt. The problem is that if you go that route, there is a certain data point you're not going to get access to. And that data point you're not going to get access to is these rate limit headers. And what these rate limit headers do is they give you context on specifically where your specific key and usage is about. This might sound a little confusing, but put it this way. The way you access this is that you actually have to do an Axios webhook call to this specific URL. And then honestly, as the models get newer, you're gonna have to update that URL, which shouldn't be too big of an issue. But the idea is that this is not well-known information, because if you were to approach OpenAI's API in the sense of OpenAI.chat and you just import OpenAI, you're not gonna be able to get these specific rate limit headers because it actually requires you to do it as a post call to a specific URL. Why are these headers important? These headers are important because they are what's going to allow you to gauge whether you're going over the amount of your tokens per minute or you're going under the amount of tokens per minute. So what that means is one of the more important headers here would be random spam call. One of the most important headers here in this context would be rate limit remaining tokens. So this is going to be your tokens per minute and how many are left or available in your, within the minute. So let's say within a minute, you've had 3 people use your service. Therefore, we're down to like 130,000 tokens and we're nowhere near to 0. So we don't have to really worry about doing anything on the front end. We can still kind of proceed as normal because we know in a minute it's going to jump back up to 160,000. What that means though, is that we need to keep track of this header. So every single time you call upon OpenAI's API using a webhook and using a specific API endpoint, you're going to have to create logic where you're going to basically create your global queue, but you're going to have security measures where you are tracking every single time a message goes out through the OpenAI's API, you're keeping track of that, limit header, right? So how many tokens are left? And the way the logic would work here is you are then going to take the repeating updating of that data. So maybe your 3.5 tokens. This is like going to be your metadata. So, if you have 1,000 or you have 100 people all accessing or all using your service at once, they're all going to be pushed towards the same OpenAI key. So therefore, you're going to have, it's not going to be like, oh, these 10 users have a different tokens amount left, or these users have a different tokens amount left. No, all 100 have the same amount of tokens left because they're all using your centralized key. Therefore, We know that if we go through 30 users and we have within that minute, let's say there is, 30 seconds left, but we know we've just hit, now we only have 20,000 tokens left. Instead of taking the risk of letting the service continue, it is better to have some type of cloud function set up where we say that if tokens for 3.5 is found to be less than, not greater than 20,000, then the logic we're going to proceed with is we're going to add all people's data into a global queue. And then what we'll do is that we're going to create something called a pub sub. And the pub sub is going to be able to check every 5 minutes to check this underlying amount of tokens left. So the pub sub here, we're going to go ahead and set up, and we're going to say every 5 minutes, we're going to go ahead and check our meta 3.5 token data point and our meta 4 token point. The next question you might be asking yourself is, how do we check that accurately if the only way we get access to this is through a message incurring? That's the only way we're going to get access to this. The only way we get access to the remaining tokens is if there is a message had incurred. Therefore, we get a fresh data point. Therefore, we get the new 1 minute where it's like, okay, we're back to 160,000. We're back to 40,000 tokens. The way to do that is you'd set up that pub sub. I'm not too sure if that's called something different in different documentation. I'm just referring to Firebase in this context. And we'll set it up so we will do this. We're going to have a OpenAI prompt for 3.5. And we're going to have an OpenAI prompt for 4. But the purpose of these prompts is going to be sending as little amount of data in that underlying message. The idea here is that the message that we're sending is more of just a feeler message. And what I mean by that is that in reality, the expenditure found in this 3.5 message and the expenditure found in this 4 message, maybe is only 5 tokens and maybe is only 10 tokens. And the reason we do that is when we enter that global queue, we're going to have logic within that pub sub that essentially says that, we're only spending 5 tokens, so we'll be able to get that accurate number. So when the 5 minutes hits and it realizes that the logic you would have inside that pub sub would be when the tokens, so back to 20,000, when the tokens found, so 20,000 here, when it is greater than 20,000, because what's the original way we entered in this entire logic is because we knew it was under, but when it's greater than 20,000, because of that repeated check on the limits of the tokens per minute, we've checked it every 5 minutes, and we know that after a certain amount of time, it's going to reset to 160. Therefore, when the tokens are higher, we're going to go ahead and proceed with handling and pushing back the data that we had stored in the global queue back to its underlying users. Now, on top of that, there's going to be a meta boolean that's used that for the global queue, you're going to have your data stored in this array, but you're going to also use a boolean which is called status. And the idea of this boolean is the status paused or is it not paused? Now, if it is paused, that was what incurs the data to be stored at the global queue. Then the logic of the pub sub to incur, because it's basically kicking in. It's like, okay, well, we know we're paused, so we got to keep checking for the tokens and making sure that we are over a certain amount in order to proceed with everyone else's process. Now, that being said, the reason this is important, and I want to make today's video on this, which is honestly probably one of the most complex videos I've made on this channel. So keep in mind, when I do come out with that series, Building Out AI SaaS, it's going to get very complex. It's possible, but it is very complex. I want to make this video because it's important to, one, understand this, but two, start getting some wiggle room with OpenAI's API. Does that mean request a little bit more usage? I would encourage to do so. Does that mean, maybe do more processes using it? I would encourage to do so, because I'll be honest with you, our original intention is that we were going to reach out to OpenAI's support team and be like, hey, we're about to launch this SaaS. Right now we're stuck at this amount. We probably want a little bit more wiggle room within your backend. But when we checked, I just checked within, the last 2 weeks, I was like, holy smokes. When we started this entire process, we were only afforded 160,000 tokens per minute, but now we're afforded 1 million. So that's well above the amount that we need at our current stage. With our current processes and how our SaaS works, 1 million tokens per minute for 16K would, in our context, would mean that 400 users would have to hit the same button within the same minute for the global queue to incur. What's important though is that if you don't have that much breadth or that much room, that's why global queue is important. Now, global queue is going to be important for us regardless, because why would if we do hit 500 in a minute? Now we have that global queue as insurance to ensure that the platform doesn't break, and we can, ensure that everyone's experience of the platform is good. Knowing this though, insurance, or maybe insurance is not the best word to use in this, but having some type of insurance or some type of security or something where you have to take into account for everything. So we went with the logic that are we going to look at tokens per minute or requests per minute? For us, tokens per minute was more relevant because in reality, there's no way we would over requests per minute would never be higher than tokens per minute in our context. That being said, if you are using, maybe it only costs 10 tokens, then requests per minute would be more pertinent in this context. For us, it's just tokens per minute as we're expending 3,000 to 4,000 per minute, or 3,000 to 4,000 per process. Knowing that, that concludes today's video. Yes, this was a very complex video. If you are building out AI SaaS and you're approaching OpenAI's dashboard and just the API in general, I encourage you to check this video back out. When you get to this point, and more specifically, understanding rate limiting better. I mean, honestly, this also ensures that you have some type of, insurance that if you do blow up, or if the amount of usage that you have access to is very low, that you have a way to handle it and you don't, basically can't scale. Because this is part of scaling. This is a huge part of scaling. Scaling is having the ability to handle 500 clicks in 1 minute in that context. So if you enjoyed today's video, make sure to leave a like for the value found today. If you want more talks like this, I will say this is a little more complex than I usually do on this channel. You can check out the playlist at the end here, where I'm basically diving into more topics like this, like AI SaaSes and just digital content in general. But without further ado, I'll see you in the next video.
Thanks for tuning in. And yes, surprise, I'm an AI avatar. Make sure to explore more here at Corbin AI, where we demystify AI for your personal and business life. Until next time.